Have you ever had your world turned upside down in an instant? So many of us have found ourselves in a situation where a parent has a sudden medical event that propels us into the world of caregiving, ready or not. Today's guest on the In Between Years is no exception. Dale Krause is the founder and CEO of the Krause Group, which encompasses multiple entities, including Krause Financial, Krause Agency, LTC Advocates, Senior Care Council, and Krause Annuity Services. Dale started his career as an estate planning and elder law attorney. During this stage, he found himself regularly working with clients that were needing to transition to a nursing home, and they were facing the real challenges of how to pay for it. Dale eventually focused his practice on Medicaid planning, and he was instrumental in developing a strategy to use an annuity in a Medicaid-compliant way to eliminate excess countable assets and help the client accelerate their Medicaid eligibility. Later on, Dale stepped away from private practice to focus full-time on the newly emerging field of Medicaid planning. Through this work, he and his team have helped tens of thousands of families preserve excess assets and qualify for Medicaid benefits more quickly. Dale is also the proud son of Shirley, and today he's going to share with us some of the things that he learned as a caregiver in her later years. Dale, welcome to the In Between Years.
Yes, and thank you for having me.
Yeah. I thought maybe we could start today, if you would, by telling us a little bit about your mom, Shirley, and what she was like, and then how your journey into caregiving got started.
Yeah, my mom and dad lived in Escanaba, Michigan. And back, I would say in 2016, my dad had passed away. And so my mom continued to live in the family home. Everything was going fine until one day, my brother, who had the last couple of years of my mom living there had moved in to help her with things, called me and said, "Hey, Dale, mom's not acting her normal self, and she hasn't really done as much. I'm not sure what to do." I told him, "You need to call a healthcare agency to come in and do a welfare check on her to figure out what's going on, if anything." And so he made the call, and about a couple hours later, I learned that they had gone to the house. They had assessed her with having suffered a stroke. They had transported her to the hospital. And so then I immediately got in the car, drove the 90 miles, where I learned that after a full assessment of her condition, she had suffered a stroke that impacted both her right and left, her right arm and leg. And so she didn't have mobility. And so the doctors that were working on her suggested that she go to a skilled nursing home facility for Medicare benefits for rehab, basically occupational and physical therapy.
And so she started her journey into that skilled nursing rehab on Medicare, which many people think, is going to be enough and is going to take care of whatever needs we have. But, as you know, being in this industry, often it doesn't. So talk to us about that. How did that journey through skilled nursing go? And, when Medicare is done paying, what happens then?
Well, Medicare typically pays for up to 100 bed days in a skilled nursing home for rehab from a medical condition. So in her case, the stroke was a medical condition. The doctors had her in a treatment plan, suggesting that with some physical and occupational therapy, she could regain her independence and go home. And so in that treatment plan, I met with the doctor, there was therapists at the nursing home facility, and they said if she comes in for her 15-minute increments, and a couple of times a day, and they make progress, she would remain on Medicare benefits as long as she continued to improve.
Okay. And so how did that go? Did she continue to improve and, make it to be able to come back home, or did improvement stall at some point, or what happened there?
Well, I did sit through some of the treatments with the therapists because they said if you wanted to stay on board, see what they're doing, you could do that because then we could help her in the off time and suggest and work with her on those same treatments.
Yeah.
And so in watching her, she knew that if she didn't regain her independence and could walk and use her right arm, that she couldn't return back to the single family home that she was used to. But she knew that by not getting better, she would have to remain in the facility. And that was not something she wanted to have happen. So she was very optimistic about doing the treatments, doing the therapies, and getting improvements.
Good. And so she worked really hard. You supported her through that, obviously. which puts an impact on your life. I mean, I'm sure you're still working at that point. You're having to step out. You said she lived 90 minutes away. That's not easy. So tell us how that impacted you at that time.
Well, I have three sisters and one brother, and we all got together and said, mom was going to try and get better and go home. So everybody thought, well, okay, that's going to take a week or two, and she'll go back home and it'll be like it used to be. Again, we were all excited, and most of us living 90 miles away could only make it up a few times while working, doing other things.
Yeah.
And so it was difficult to give her the encouragement. And so, the first week, things appeared to go well. And then I think the second week when I went back up, I asked the therapist, I said, how's she doing? And he very clearly indicated she was losing compassion for continuing to try. And if she didn't improve, then she'd have to stay in the facility, but for custodial care.
Oh, goodness. So what happened there? Did she mentally get in a better place to be able to improve and continue in the rehabilitative care, or did she have to move to the custodial side?
Well, again, as we would go up and visit, she'd get excited because she really did want to go home. That was her goal,
Yeah.
to go home. And she really did try. I mean, I sat through some of the therapy, so did my sisters. And, she was struggling. We're encouraging her, and she's excited to make the improvements. But she eventually just plateaued. And the therapist said, look, her choice at this moment, because once you plateau, you have to come off Medicare, and then you have to self-pay or go on Medicaid.
And that self-pay is not inexpensive. That's
No, I
a
think it
big
was
choice.
1,000 a month.
Yeah.
And I knew, having done tens of thousands of these cases, and with what she had, she certainly would qualify for Medicaid. But I think the biggest challenge for us as a family was to sit down with her and say, Mom, look, if you don't do the therapy, you can't get better. And if you don't get better, there's no way you can return home, because you really need to be fully functional with all the stairs and things that you would have to do on a regular basis. My brother could provide some help, but it was more like laundry, doing the dishes, fixing meals, things of that
Right.
nature, but not the personal care.
Sure. And even having those kind of physical limitations, even having care in the home, would be a lot in needing, when you have trouble navigating like the stairs and those kind of things, that's a lot. You really need somebody there with you all the time. So how did it go to finally make that decision that, okay, mom's not going to be able to return back home? And, talk to us about what that decision was like as a family, how mom took that, and how mom adapted through that transition.
Well, I think personally, she knew she wasn't going to be able to go home, because she wasn't able to do some of the personal care that she would need to do if she went home. And so for her, we could see that her disposition had changed. And so as the family, with most of us living 90 miles away, 4 children lived in Green Bay area. So we thought if she was going to remain in custodial care, that now she wouldn't have as many visits, because when you're in the Medicare side, you're getting therapy in the morning, afternoon. And so you're having more visits and things like that. And my brother, having lived with her for 2 years, their relationship was a little bit different than ours, because she didn't see us. So she was excited to see us, whereas he found it more difficult to go, because she would always say to him, well, where did you bring me a Hardee's hamburger? Did you get this? Did you get that? And of course, he could never fulfill all her expectations. So as a family, we said, look, if she's going to remain in the facility, let's get her to a custodial care facility in the Green Bay area.
Yeah.
That way we can all visit and give each other support, and at the same time support her in the way that she wanted to be supported. More visits, things of that nature.
And give your brother a break. I mean, it's hard being the one that's close and the one that is taken care of. And we hear that a lot, that the relationship there gets strained because it's different. You're not coming to visit that once a week or whatever, like you're there every day. And so you catch the brunt of the emotions and the anger and pain and everything else that goes along with it. Yeah. So when you moved to Green Bay, when you moved your mom to Green Bay, how did she take that move? That was, you said she had lived, in her home for a really long time. And so Green Bay's new, to live in, and then the facility and everything as well. How did that go?
Well, I think the two facilities are much different. The Michigan facility was more active. There's more movement and more things going on. So there's always a commotion.
Mm.
Whereas, and that for her was kind of exciting. What's going on now? Something's happening.
Yeah.
It built something into her day. But the Green Bay facility was a little more quiet and reserved, and she didn't have that opportunity to really do much. So if we were visiting, she would generally just sleep or maybe watch TV.
Yeah. And so that's, I'm sure, not as encouraging for her, to want to live life to the fullest at that point. If,
Yeah, I
nobody's
think the
visiting
other
and you're just
the
resting.
other dilemma she faced was, when you're in custodial care, you always have a roommate. Well, her roommate in the Escanaba or the Michigan facility was much more likable and more like her, whereas the one she had in the Wisconsin facility, the woman, she was very adamant about watching baseball 24/7, and she liked the TV extremely loud. And I mean,
Oh,
if you want to irritate my mom, have a baseball game on at an extremely loud volume, and it's irritating.
oh. And taking Shirley's not a baseball fan, or not as big baseball fan, at least.
No, she was not. She said it's all she wants to do is watch baseball. Well, come to find out, the woman, after about 2 weeks of being my mom's roommate, they weren't getting along at all. They were like college roommates that just couldn't tolerate each other. The woman actually got better and left the facility, which I thought was extremely unusual,
Yeah.
but she had to get out of there as much as my mom wanted her out. But then at that point, the room was all hers, and it was even more quiet, more lonely, just
Yeah.
really not the environment you really want to be in.
Mm. Yeah, that certainly makes sense. So it's a tough transition and a tough time in life for sure. So this came about suddenly for you and your family, with your mom's stroke. Had you had conversations as a family prior to that about, what your mom wanted for care or what it might be like or how you might handle it?
No, being the expert in the family, having a legal background and having done estate planning, it's, parents, when you talk to them about it, despite your credentials and background, you're still always the little kid in their
Hmm.
mind. So it's hard to get them to accept what you're saying. And they'll say, well, I heard on this show or that show that it's this way or that way. I go, Mom, it's not. I'm telling you, you
Yeah.
have to do this or do that. And she was really determined and to do things her way, but she didn't really want to talk about that. I know my dad never made it to a nursing home. He actually died at home
Mm.
and he was gone very quickly. So we didn't face any of those types of issues with long-term care with my
Right.
father. And so she didn't get exposed to that.
Right.
And I know she took care of her parents as they got older. And so she was really a care provider. But no, as a family, I think, we know things can happen and we talk about it, but very generally. Until it actually happens,
Right.
there were really no hard decisions to be made.
Right. That's true. And, you were fortunate in some ways as you went through this that your mom was able to be part of those conversations with you, and participate in that and express at that time, what she wanted and what her desires were, even if, it didn't all work out the way that she wanted. I mean, obviously she wanted to return home, but, you were fortunate in the fact that at least she could participate in the conversation at that point. So, playing on your experience in the industry, I just want to talk about that for a little bit. There is a lot going on in the industry around Medicaid, around extended care. It continues to be in the news and it continues to be talked about. So just from a professional perspective, have you seen any changes recently, positive or negative, that you think are going to impact families on this journey?
Well, I think the need for all the care is out there. And I think as a system, when I first got into Medicaid planning, it really meant long-term care in a nursing home setting.
Mhm.
And that was in the late 80s, early 90s. And then assisted livings developed. They become more prevalent. And then, there's all different types of care at different levels, which have all come about since the late 90s. So I think that not only with the demographics and the baby boomers getting ready to retire and need long-term care, there's going to be a high demand for things that are out there. And, the thing that I find strikingly different is, I think the generation before me, I'm 68. And so I think the generation, my mom's generation, they were much different. I think we have greater needs that we're going to want. We're going to
Right.
want internet. We're going to want cable. We're going to, all our devices, and we
Mhm.
want to communicate and things like that. And I think the typical room in a nursing home has maybe a couple outlets per side. And so I think there's going to be a lot of things that the baby boomers are going to expect
Yeah.
that really aren't out there now. And so I think you're going to see a lot of changes that are going to come about as a result of the high demand for not only the care, but the type of care that we're going to expect.
I hadn't thought about the fact that a Medicaid, nursing home bed might not include internet access. That would be a big deal, for a lot of people. So certainly some things to think about there. You mentioned assisted livings and in home care, which certainly are growing in popularity. As an expert in the Medicaid space, does Medicaid ever cover that? Does Medicaid ever help with those types of things, or is it only for nursing homes?
Well, I think it depends on which state you live in. Like I know in New York covers all level of care, home health care, assisted living, and all of that. They have specialized programs. And not every state is fortunate to have all of those. So it really depends on the state and what's available. I know even with like assisted living in many states, there's just so many slots that are available. And so a facility, assisted living facility might have 20 spots out of, 100 beds, but there's only 20 that are available for that type of assisted living care that Medicaid can pay for. Because if every spot was open, every spot would be filled with a Medicaid bed. But that's not the way the program works. If there's slots that are Medicaid slots, as they fill, there's no, even though demand may be more, they can't just add people into the facility. They got to get one of those beds. And so I think
Mm.
the demand and the availability really are critical when engaging in this type of planning. Because again, when you're looking around to determine what type of facility should my loved one go to, you've got to ask some of those questions.
Yeah.
Is it going to be a private pay? Is it going to be long-term care insurance, or is it going to be Medicaid?
Certainly sounds like a discussion that families would be better to have ahead of time, especially if they have the luxury of seeing that this part of the journey may be coming, for them. Because yeah, if you want to go assisted living, for instance, in that route and have to get on a list or find one of those rare beds if they're available in your state, that seems like that could be a big challenge.
Yeah, that's why I personally, having witnessed this whole crisis, I did get a long-term care insurance policy for myself, and it's a very good plan. I bought it in my 40s. It's all paid up, so I have no surprise premium increases. And at the time that I go in, because I knew of the costs around the nation, so it depends on where you go, where the cost really develops. But the policy I have is one of the best policies, and so I'll have not only choice of care, but I can go just about anywhere and have those funds available. And so I think what becomes very important for someone in my situation is, when I need the care, the question will be where is it going to occur? Whereas for some families, they don't even know what mom or dad has. And so
Right.
they're not sure they can even afford to pay for it. Whereas in my situation, yes, I can pay for it. Now get me in the right facility
Right.
at the right level. And I think by going into a facility sooner than later, you avoid those risks that you have when you live alone. If you
Hmm.
live alone and you're not getting 7 hours a week that you really need, you could script your medication, slip and fall, end up in the nursing home by way of the hospital, which then accelerates your climb up that long-term care ladder.
That is such a great point. Number one, being able to go in sooner, which I don't think people always think about. But you made such a good point about that, preventing something more serious from happening and taking your choice away. I know my own mother-in-law lives in an assisted living facility, and honestly, she's living her best life there. It's tons of activity. She has a great time. For our family was a really great choice. Now, I wish she was proactive like you and had planned ahead with long-term care because, her money is only going to last her so long. And, those things are not, even though it's not as much as full nursing home care would be, it is not inexpensive. It is a pretty significant cost. And so her time is going to be limited there. So I love that you brought up the fact that people have the ability, if they will think ahead and plan for this, you can buy it, you can pay it up before you retire and always, have those choices on the table for yourself, if it ever comes to that for you. So we're starting to run up to our time here, but I do have one final question for you today. And that is, what is one thing that you found as you went through this journey that really surprised you, that no one told you was going to happen in this journey?
Well, I think it's addressing the issue is if your parents not going to return home and they live in the home by themselves pretty much, when do we do something with the house? And so that's really a tough deal because my mom, despite the fact that we started downsizing all of her possessions, knowing that if we were ultimately going to have to sell the house, which we decided we wanted to do, that we had to get rid of everything. It's really hard to get rid of those personal items.
Oh, yeah.
Because again, there's just nowhere to put them all that they're available, but yet you've got to make the decision. If we're going to get the house, we've got to get many of the things out of the house to paint it, do all of the things that are necessary to sell it. I think that was, for us, was difficult because even there were times that my mom would say to us near the end, she'd say, bring me the radio off the windowsill in the kitchen. And we're thinking, wait, what radio? Does anybody remember a radio? Of course, she's just thinking we're going to bring it in. But first, we got to figure out, where was it? Which one?
Did you already sell it or downsize
we
it?
sell it. Is it lost? So that's the tough part. You feel guilty because, she'll say, did you bring the radio? And it's like, yes, if my brother has it, he'll bring it in when he comes in. And we're hoping that we just find the thing. So I think that's probably the hardest thing is when you go down this road is to figure out those things where there's sentimental value or family value, but it's not really a monetary value.
Yeah.
And you don't want to lie to the parent. I mean, I don't want to say, Mom, I sold the radio.
Right.
I really want to bring you the radio, make you happy.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Such tough choices, such tough decisions. You have to do it. You have to move through it. But at the same time, that's a hard thing to do, especially, you don't want to take anything away from them. But at the same time, you've got to make the decisions that help you move forward with, downsizing their possessions and selling the house and all those things. So yeah, that is a great piece of advice to leave people with. So with that, and on that note, we will wrap it up for today. So thank you so much, Dale, for joining us, for sharing about your journey with your mom, Shirley, and your expertise in the area of Medicaid and Medicaid planning. I hope people learned a lot from your journey and your story and your expertise. And with that, we will wrap it there. Thank you all for joining us. Have a wonderful day.